is leveraging for teaching and learning, and agenda is right here in front of you. And so, as you can see, these are all the things that we need in the class. But one thing, as those of you that have dabbled with AI a little bit or a lot more, you must have realized that the old industrial model of education is passé. We are no more, the status quo of what we thought was good education is gone. And now we have to, or what a good strategy for teaching is gone. And will have to redraft our own mindset and recraft our own lesson plans and activities and so on and so forth. There'll be fewer barriers. I think when we say, are we using AI as faculty, our research at FC and other researchers have shown that students are way ahead in their usage of AI. Now, how effective they are is another story, because if the faculty are not aware of how well to use it, it's not a surprise that students might not be very competent in how to get maximize or leverage the use of AI. And those are things that are still up in the air. AI, we know, helps you dream. It helps you think. I use it now as a brainstorming, buddy. It lightens your load. For all of us, it is lightened. It helps us design our content in a more according to what we can imagine. I think it's more about how we create that design and, of course, to advance our work. But one thing is clear: no matter how much we read about it, unless we practice, I don't think we are going anyway. So it's about, first of all, understanding what our problem is, what do we want to resolve. Then we select the suitable tools and the suitable prompts. Now, these are all things that will have to be learned. Reading about them will not happen very easily. So you really have to get your hands onto the AI world, and you have to select the tools. You have to understand how to do effective. And we have done those sessions. We had very good sessions on the tools and how to make your prompts effective. How do you interact with the tools? But most important of all, I think what I am realizing, and you will realize, that we will have to keep on reflecting, practicing, reflecting, and improving. I think that's the only way to get a real good grasp about AI and how it can make your life easy. And mind you, I'm still not talking about the challenges. We had that, we covered them in a previous session. So with all those benefits come a lot of, concerns that you have to also understand and take forward. I will now introduce Ed Pitt. I am happy to call him a good friend who has always helped me out whenever I've asked some questions or wanted to clarify my mind. And I'm very thankful for that honor you give me, Ed. But he is a program director for the postgraduate certificate in higher education and a reader in higher education and academic practice at the University of Kent. And you will have to explain a little bit, what do you mean by a reader in higher education? What does that really mean, Ed?
Yeah, it's a bit of an old-fashioned term that we use in the UK to sort of bridge the gap between associate professor and professor. So in some universities it's called professor without chair. I'm essentially just standing waiting for my chair.
So it's not just it's just not a terminology.
Yeah, it's very old. It's an antiquated term. There's probably 5 or 6 unis that still use it now, and then everyone else has moved away. So, yeah.
Okay. So, and I see that you have been collaborating with academics in UK and Australia. And what is that, academics?
Yeah, so I'm a fellow at the University of Beacon in Melbourne, Australia, where they've got a centre for research in assessment and digital learning. So I've been working with them on various projects around assessment and feedback, particularly looking at student achievement and feedback, and more recently collaborating with colleagues in Hong Kong as well, looking at rubrics and process and feedback and sort of projects around examination feedback and lots of things. And even today, an article that came out about fairness perceptions in students with group work. And we've got an instrument that we can use to look at how students see their experience working in groups. Lots of exciting things been happening.
Okay. And I forgot to mention that you are the guru of assessments. I think that's where in the world of AI, you are going to be very much in demand. And I see all your work abroad, sort of focuses around that. You also are of course, like you just said, your principal research is assessment and feedback. And you have a particular focus upon students' emotions, and that's the effective domain that you're also during feedback situations, and that's remarkable. So your agenda is supported by a grant from the British Academy to explore UK undergraduate students' experiences and to use of dialogic feedback. Now, you are going into areas of feedback that are really deep, and you're looking at through the different prisms of the types of feedback, and your interests are, of course, like I said, assessment of feedback, students' emotions, and you are also working on the grants like SEDA small grant, SCDA. What does that stand for?
So that's the Staff Educational Development Association. So it's looking at it's a similar sort of thing to Advanced Entry, if you like, about how people as academic developers develop themselves, and it's a body that helps them to
and Surrey Institute of Advanced Studies. I think these are places where you're doing research. So without much ado, we had 1,000, nearly 200 registrations, of which 900 some are from national, and there are another 220 from 25 other countries of the world. So your video and PowerPoint is going to reach all these people. Right now, we have 162 participants. So over to you, Ed.
Thanks very much, Roxana. Can I just check that my sound is better now that I've made some adjustments? Yeah, sorry.
It's a lot better, yeah.
Yeah, it seems, I think that there's something going on in my office. Now it's better. Great, excellent. Apologies for that. So yes, thank you very much for the invitation to come and speak with you today. I propose to sort of split this into three sections, really. The first one is, as you see on the screen here, I've got a series of bullet points, and I'm going to look particularly at the start around how we might create a clear artificial intelligence course policy for programs of studies. I'm going to go through various different areas of that. And then I think at that point, I'll pause for some questions from the audience. So if you have audience questions as you're going through my slides in the next 20 minutes, please post them in the chat, and then I'll look to address those. I'm not sure if we're able to unmute people, Mewesh, but if we can, then we can do that as well. And then I'll go back into the presentation where I'll particularly look at the advantages that AI might afford colleagues in terms of their own working lives, and then move towards students' use of AI, particularly with a focus on assessment and feedback and the role that might play. And I think you mentioned, Roxana, the dialogic feedback process that I've been working with various colleagues on. And I think this particular element here is looking particularly around how students might have a dialogic interaction with AI when it comes to their assessment and feedback processes. So I will share my screen and we will see how this goes. Can I just check that you are able to see my PowerPoint?
Yeah, it's visible.
It is visible. And that's all good? Excellent. Okay.
Perfect.
Thank you. So as I mentioned at the start, I want to look at how we might craft a clear course policy. And I think this is important, particularly when we look at how universities are interpreting the evolving nature of artificial intelligence. And certainly in the last 15 to 16 months, since the onset of ChatGPT, etc., lots of universities have been scrambling around to think, well, how can we use this? And I often use the analogy with AI is that when you are an academic and you're teaching post-PhD, for example, you're quite often a couple of chapters ahead of students in the course textbook because it's rare for us to be teaching entirely what we did in our PhD. However, when it comes to the use of AI, I think we're probably a few paragraphs ahead of our students when it comes to the use of AI. And that can sometimes be a little disconcerting in the fact that we as professionals are quite often assured of our knowledge and our understanding of the things that we're engaged with. But this is a very emerging and changing field. And that can be sometimes a little unsettling in terms of our own knowledge and understanding. So I think having courses like this are fantastic for us to understand the different implications. So what I want to sketch out are some of the areas that we might consider around a course policy. And what I've seen, particularly in the UK sector over the last 16 months, is very much an institutional approach rather than every university doing the things the same. And that's somewhat different to approaches that we may have taken to other areas of practice in higher education, where quite often, particularly in the UK and Europe and even in Australia, universities often have identical policies for the same sorts of things like assessment, feedback, etc. What I've seen in AI is there is very disparate practice across the sectors in terms of the local interpretation about what that works for them in their particular context. So I want to caveat what I'm about to say in the thinking about some of this might be very much individualized to your own institutions. But that said, I think there's quite a number of guiding principles that we need to consider in order to tick a lot of boxes around the policy and how that might have implications for the way that academics might behave, and also how our students might behave, and also the wider student experience in terms of what will our students leave the higher education institute with in terms of the contribution to society, but also understanding how AI might evolve during their working lives. So much of what I'm going to talk about today will also be provided in some links towards the end of these slides that highlight some of the work that Roxana and colleagues have done in the centre here. But I think the overriding areas that I want to focus on in this first slide are around the ethics and responsible use of AI. We're very much trying to get our heads around what AI is capable of doing. Even if you sign up to weekly or daily emails around the developments in AI, you will be amazed at the sorts of things that AI can suddenly do. Even last week, I was struck by the onset of ChatGPT 4.0, where you can now have a conversation and a dialogue, and you can give instruction to the AI to teach you what to do in a particular. The example I saw was a mathematical problem where the certain prompts would allow that AI to speak to you and would respond to your auditory responses. Now, that's a huge change compared to putting something in and asking for some information that most of us probably would have experienced 3 or 4 months ago. So things are moving rapidly, and new things that we probably couldn't have imagined 6 months ago have started to come. But the issue with this is that we have to have an overriding understanding of the ethics and the responsibility in terms of the use of AI. And I think as higher education professionals, it is incumbent on us to shape and mold the way that our students will use AI in the future and the way that society will use AI. We are crafting the young minds that are going to contribute and change the world, but we want them to do that in an ethical and responsible way. So how can we do that? Through the use of a policy that will enable that, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. But also about how we might be able to utilize and enhance our education provision. AI has some fantastic potential. It has some capabilities that, as I mentioned, are emerging, but already it has got lots of things that we can utilize to improve our teaching practice and our students' learning experiences. So I'm going to mention those. And I think the final one is around the collaboration and how we as higher education professionals have a responsibility to collaborate with organizations and the government to develop AI policies. For example, my own university, we have some world-leading researchers on cybersecurity, and we are shaping the way that cybersecurity works for the world, and that's incredibly important. Similarly, there will be professionals in higher education that will feed into government policies, will feed into the UN's approach to the use of AI, for example, so that we as higher education professionals that have the capacity and the intelligence and the knowledge and understanding of the use of this can shape the way that governments utilize this. Because I suspect that many of us share the worry that AI could one day get out of control. So lots of governments are meeting across governments, across countries, in order to look at the way that AI is used and trying to make sure, we hope, that AI doesn't take over. There's always the fear. I don't know if you remember the films from the 90s where the robots would take over the world. I think there's probably anyone that watched those in their childhood, like I did, would think, crikey, this is really scary. So there's lots and lots of worry and trepidation in the general public. So again, this is the role that universities play as the knowledge holders in order to shape governmental policy on the use of this. So that all sounds quite high level, but how does that fit into the day-to-day practice of university policy? Well, I think firstly, it's about understanding AI tools. And again, this is part of the sort of weekly CPD, I think, that probably many of us are engaged with. The fact that you're here today indicates that you're engaging with that. But I think trying things out and understanding the opportunities or the potential that AI has in terms of our working lives, but also thinking about the limitations and where do some things that happen in AI you think, well, actually that doesn't necessarily work for that particular context. And I've often advocated to many colleagues and in the various talks that I've done with colleagues around the world is actually trying these things out in a low risk way, thinking about what the potential might be and thinking about the issues. And it's very much a thought process. And I often think about the position of knowledge that we're in. And I'm always fondly recall a conversation I had with a colleague that contacted me about a year ago and said, I've broke our assessment. And I said, well, what do you mean by I broke our assessment? And they said, well, I've managed to get AI to write the essay for our assessment. And I said, well, talk me through the process. And after a while, it became quite clear that my colleague had had 35 different interactions with the AI in order to come up with this brilliant essay. And I think what that colleague had potentially missed was the fact that they came from a position of advanced knowledge and expertise. And they were obviously able to prompt the AI in order to get the output they wanted because A, they designed the assessment, but also that they had a really thorough understanding of the topic. And I said, well, I wonder whether our students would necessarily have that level of knowledge and understanding to be able to just do that. So part of this is understanding the opportunities and limitations. And that gave us a good insight into the way that AI would produce something, because I do think that there is a perception that AI will solve every problem in the world and that you just put a couple of things into a piece of software and you will have a magical, perfect answer. But for any of us that have used it, will realize that there are limitations. And there are also those ethical issues that I'm going to draw on to those. But we have to get our students to understand that as well as our colleagues. I think the other real issue is around privacy and data considerations and around how we are sharing our information in terms of our intellectual property, in terms of the things that we create, but also in terms of what happens when we utilize work that perhaps our students have produced that we may use AI to help us with. What are the privacy and data considerations? What do these companies that run these different pieces of software do with our data? What happens as a result of us giving that data when it comes to further down the line? And we have to be considerate of that in terms of the privacy and the permissions. So that's something we're going to talk about. And I think the final thing is bias and accuracy and recognizing the potential biases. And there's some interesting stories that have come out over the last 6 months in terms of Google's AI software, where they have almost recreated history to become more inclusive. So there was a story a few months ago where some researchers at a university, I can't remember which country, had tried to get the AI to generate some images for it. And there's already been some discussion around bias within the Google software. And what Google did was reprogram that software to remove the bias. So at that time, there was a bias towards white Western males, and therefore then reformatted the system to be more inclusive. But what happened was when the researchers asked for the AI to produce images of Nazis wearing Nazi Germany from the war, people wearing Nazi uniforms, those would come out as black males wearing Nazi uniforms. Now, for any of you that have followed history in the 1940s, that was obviously very incorrect. Similarly, it would have Indian American dressed in wear from a completely different time that wouldn't be representative of the truth. So these biases has almost been controlled for in completely the wrong way. So we have to look at those and recognize the inaccuracies of AI-generated information. And what is overwhelmingly true within this situation is that despite the potential of AI, we still have a situation where the knowledge and understanding of factual information and historical events, for example, they are fundamental because you need that basis of knowledge in order to understand the inaccuracy that AI may produce. So what I'm saying here is that there is an overwhelming fear that AI will eradicate higher education professionals, for example, and that it will be able to do everything that we can do. But there is a fundamental understanding that we have that tacit knowledge that perhaps at the moment AI does not have. So there are issues around accuracy and bias that we have to help our students understand. So how can we use effectively generative AI for our careers? Well, clearly we can help through a university policy where we encourage staff to use AI to create resources and create training opportunities for staff. Now, many of you have probably utilized AI for starters, for give me some understanding of X or Y, or what might I need to do to produce something. So if you got it to do an outline syllabus, for example, it's very effective at creating that outline. And it would probably give you quite a basic template. It will give you something that will be quite generic, but it would give you that starting point. And then it would be for you to input the institutional context or your particular disciplinary context in order to make that more personalized to your course, your program, your module, whatever it might be. But it can be fantastic. And you may have noticed already that I have used AI for this presentation to create these images. And I want you to play a game with me as we go through this session, is to spot the deliberate mistakes or issues that the AI has with creating certain images. And at the end, I'll ask if anyone noticed any of these, because what I've done is I've got the AI to, in various guises, to edit and to reformat some of the pictures, but I've left a few in there where perhaps it has some shortcomings in its image generation. There are also some disciplinary specific guidance around tailoring AI policies to different academic disciplines. And I think that's quite good in order for us to think about the way that certain disciplines would naturally lend themselves to using AI, whereas other disciplines might have another approach to using AI. So for example, in my own institution, and I'm aware of this in several others in the UK, our engineering department are really keen to use AI, which is fantastic. And they very much allow their students to use AI. They are using it in the work that they do. They're using it for assessment feedback. However, other departments, such as humanities department, our English department, are very resistant to using AI because they're worried about students generating the essay content by using AI or over-relying on AI. So within an institution, we have a dichotomy of approach, and therefore our university policies need to appreciate the contextual differences and the pedagogical underpinning about why an engineering department, in this example, may want to use AI because they feel that that is potentially training their students for the future, whereas an English department in humanities feel that at the moment AI is not something that they want to train their students in. So we have different approaches, and I think that's an acceptable way to think about the way that our disciplinary norms, processes, signature pedagogies, if you like, are processing this use of AI and having a change in the way that we interpret that locally. The final thing on this slide is the inclusive application, about how the AI might be utilised by different student groups. We have a huge inclusivity agenda in the UK. We have a very diverse student body within one classroom. We have students all the way through the different achievement statuses, right from borderline passes all the way up to high first class, that would be in the same classrooms. But how does AI work for those different student groups in terms of learning needs, but also in terms of access and equity in terms of the use of that information? We still have lots of students that don't have access outside of the classroom. We still have students that perhaps don't have the same literacy level in terms of IT that some of the other students might have. So how can we make AI inclusive so that it doesn't become something that creates barriers to students' progression? But I think one thing that is true is that AI can have huge potential for adapting our teaching and assessment, particularly around how we might help students to use AI to improve their critical reasoning and how we might prepare our students for real-world application. it's abundantly clear that in the next 10 years, any student that leaves higher education now will need to be able to understand, use, and think about the bias, the limitations of AI in their everyday working life. We're already hearing stories of certain professions that are hugely impacted by AI. Lots and lots of different disciplines that are now going to move in towards lifelong learning, and the jobs that we are preparing our students to go into will be using AI all of the time. So how can we mirror that in an authentic way so that our students are better prepared for what they're going to experience in the future, but also the expectations that employers will have? In the UK and in Europe, we have a huge focus on the value that higher education has for society, but there is an increasing focus upon the value that it has to the economy in terms of the employability status that our students hold. I would imagine that lots and lots of employers are now asking students about their experiences of AI, and they will expect their students that are going to be recruited for graduate jobs, for example, to have a good proficiency in using AI. So how can we do that through our learning experiences? But also, how can we give our staff the autonomy in their teaching methods to, as I mentioned, have that ability to diversify their curriculum so that they can be empowered to use AI in different creative ways, for example, in their teaching, but also AI in assessments. And we've got a number of colleagues that I've been working with over the last 12 months that are doing some amazing things with AI in terms of getting students to do multiple drafts, to do reflective pieces on their use of AI, so that they really understand these biases, the shortcomings, but also the effect that that interaction has with AI on their work that they produce. Similarly, thinking about how that might apply to the real world, we've got students that are currently on placement in business environments in the UK. And they are all using AI in their everyday lives. They're in marketing, they're in recruitment, they're using AI to create job specs, they're using AI to filter through potential applicants for jobs that they're tasked with recruiting for. So AI is having huge impacts on their working lives, but then they'll come back to university and they'll reflect upon that and think about how that might change the way that they work in the future. And I've mentioned already about addressing the potential paywall and subscription tools to ensure equal access. Part of the model that we've got, for example, with ChatGPT, is that if you pay for ChatGPT, you get a lot more functionality and a lot more potential. Whereas if you use the free version of ChatGPT, you're somewhat limited. Now, whether they will change that business model in the future is unknown, but I suspect that there will be two different tracks that we will use AI for in terms of the free and the paywall. And that obviously creates inequity in terms of access to that for some student body, but also for some different communities that may not have the funding to be able to allow their students to utilize those different opportunities. The next thing I want to talk about is academic rigor and integrity. And I think this is probably the thing that comes up the most. When I talk about assessment with colleagues, and I've done various talks over the last 6 months in the UK, mostly at the end of my talk, they say, well, what's going to happen about AI and academic integrity? Are our students going to use it to cheat? And I think this is where at the moment we have this sort of balance between the potential of AI, but also this sort of deep-rooted distrust of the way that people will utilize it, and the worry that students will just use it to essentially cheat, in inverted commas. So we think that at the moment, policy needs to be updated to reflect the fact that AI is an emergence in an academic conduct policy. And it's not a case of, well, there's a piece of software out there that can just detect whether you've used AI. I'm friendly with a couple of eminent researchers in assessment and feedback, and recently they've shared their story where they feel now that prior to submission of articles, that they need to check whether or not their work has been flagged as being used for AI. And a lot of this software, because of the quality, and this is my hunch, the quality of their writing, this software is saying, well, that must have been produced by AI. And that causes some problems because they're saying, well, I didn't use AI, but the AI detection software thinks that the work is such high caliber that it must have been created by AI. And that's a worry that the AI is being trained to think in that way, because it's been trained on the highest quality material that is out there in the academic world. So there's a bit of an issue around AI detection. Most universities that I'm aware of across the world have decided not to use AI detection software because of the lack of credibility in the detection rates that it portrays. We use Turnitin, for example, which is a big company that does plagiarism detection. Now, it's very, very good at that. It's very, very efficacious. However, when it comes to detecting AI, not so good. And there's lots of false positives, which are problematic when you go through the academic misconduct process, because then students will say, well, actually, the rigor of that process isn't there, so therefore you can't prove. So that's one of the things that we have to have. Now, my own university, we do allow AI to be used by students, but it's in a controlled way, and we ask academics to think about their assessment design, about how it's integrated in, so that students are aware that we know they're going to use it, but also it's part of the process, so they're reflecting on their use of AI, rather than this sort of, we give them a piece of work and then they go off and use AI, and we sort of then say, oh, we're going to detect you from using it. So there's lots of discussion around that. So we're actually getting them to use AI in a supported way and an informed way, to how it can enhance and improve their work rather than doing it for them. So it's not a case of just putting something into an AI platform and saying, do that for me. It's more nuanced than that. And what we're asking students is to have an open dialogue, discuss with our students. And this has been very effective at my own institution, and I know of several others in the UK, for example, where we're actually encouraging questions, discussion, actively talking about it. And there's a fantastic researcher from Hong Kong called Cecilia Chan, written lots and lots in the last 6 months. I would suggest Googling her on her work about this, because I think that that's really starting to get students to understand that it is an emerging concept. And the more dialogue and discussion that we have around that, about its use and how it can affect that, we start to understand students' thought processes around the way that they construct their work, but also we understand the potential or the issues that we have with AI. But the key thing within this, as I mentioned at the end of this slide, is it's without fear of penalisation, without the fear that students are going to be penalised for using AI in a way that isn't just cheating. It's more about the process. And where I've seen the biggest success with assessment with AI is that the process is embedded. It's part of the way that the students construct their work. And I'll give some examples later. And the final thing on this is about collaboration. And I've mentioned around cross-sector collaboration with governments, but I think also it's apparent that working with schools is something. I've got daughters that are at primary school at the moment, which is around ages 5 to 12. And it's clear that AI is already being used in primary schools. And if we extrapolate the way that AI is expanding over the next 10 years, those are the sorts of people that will be in our classrooms in 8 to 10 years. And their proficiency in the use of AI will be extremely developed compared to the students that we've got now. So working with schools and employers and professional bodies to understand the use of AI, I think can enhance our best practice ways, but also think about the ways that we can influence the use of AI going forward. So we do need to regularly assess the policy, the effectiveness, the fairness, the equity, all of those things that I've mentioned. And we would ordinarily, for example, review our policies in the UK around between 3 and 5 years. We're now doing that every year when it comes to AI because of the evolution and the change, but also because we are very much feeling in the dark around this because it's so new. And also engaging experts and leading academics to address the emerging challenges. And there's many of those around the world. And I think having these sorts of discussions are really important so that we can come together to share our experiences, but also our best practices and our things that we'd like to improve. So at this point, I want to open the floor to some questions from our audience. And I want to see how that might work. So how might we do this, folks?
Yeah, Ed, thank you so much so far. There have been, there's a question you talked about academic integrity and some research. And so, if we had a question, which research were you quoting? That was one. And could you please respond to that? It was on the slide on academic integrity.
Yeah, yes. So there are two researchers that I want to flag that I would say that are the best people to go and look at for this. There's a guy called Philip Dawson, who is at Deakin University, who has written extensively on AI, but also on academic integrity and the way that those two things collaborate. The other person is Sarah Eaton in Canada that you may be familiar with. I would say those two people at the moment are definitely the ones to look at academic integrity and AI.
Okay. And there was another interesting one, and I'm sorry, I cannot pronounce the name. Please tell me if that is okay. It was something about which tool it is for Lester's Ovendo, NCBIS. I don't know what NCBIS institution stands for. It says, which AI tool did you use to generate this presentation? Please share. And I thought the images could be from Bing because that's what I do a lot. I put in that I want this image, and Bing comes up with great images, and I've used them. But what about you, Ed?
Okay, so I have got a ChatGPT subscription, and part of that is I go on to ChatGPT now 4.0, and I've used DALL, D-A-L-L, and then there's a little dash and then E. And what happens is that initially when I started using it, you would say, well, create an image of X or Y. I did find at the start that it was quite, well, in fact, you'll see the image on the screen now. It's very focused on business. And you get a lot of people in suits, and it has this mindset. There is now a new feature where you click on the image and there's a sort of edit button. And I find that really useful because what you can do, rather than telling it to globally amend something, what happens then is it comes up with a completely new image, but it ends up being the same basis. You can highlight a particular part of the image to say, I actually want you to change this bit. And you're then a bit more instructive. And what I found then is that you will get a change. However, I seem to really struggle to get it to remove a couple of things, and not to spoil the game, but you'll notice that every time you get an image of students, they're behind a desk, and you can't seem to get them away from being behind a desk. Now, as any of you will know, we don't have our students sat behind a computer and a desk, but it seems to think that AI is a computer and therefore they must be sat at a desk at a, you know, I once had it where I got them to be walking around a campus with tablets. But I had to go back and forth a lot in order to get them to change. But if you persevere, you will get that. Okay.
Yeah, I know that you have, it's like, you know, when we start prompting, we have to keep on regenerating the prompts till we get the answer. So, you know, I have realized that either you have to have a very methodical framework in your mind before you pose a question. And I think, Daniel, you gave us a very good, you know, he showed how to put contextual, strong, lengthy, actually, prompts into, even with examples, into the AI to get the response that he wanted. Now, most of us do not work like that. And I have, like I said, it's like keep on trying. At the end of the day, it's still your creativity and your mind that will put a prompt to get the answer you want. AI does not cover the whole scope. There's so many times I put into AI, but you have missed this. Even if you say, do a broad, you know, check of all the points that are important in such a case, it will still miss out a few main areas. And I had to go back, but you didn't talk about this. Oh, yes, you are right, I forgot, or something like that. So it's like really exciting that AI is also learning from us at this time. It's not just we learning from AI. AI is in that learning stage. And like you were saying, that fantasy of robots taking over, you know, a world of cyborgs is already here, I think. A little part of something in your body is a cyborg. And then how much is the cyborg and how much is the human will get to be a debate. Yeah, absolutely.
I agree. I think there's one thing I want to flag up about this, and I don't know if anyone said this on any other calls, but within the paid for version, there is something called GPTs. And as someone mentioned this, because what I found is that they are a fantastic way of really contextualizing the different areas that you want it to focus on. So if you have a project that you're working on and you want it to do specific things, you can prompt engineer within that that framework rather than it just being the user chatbot interface. And I've found that if you can add more information through file uploads, you can really help it to learn exactly what it is you're trying to do. So you have to feed the information in. So you're almost training it, like you mentioned, on your specific thing, rather than it having a global impression that you're a higher education lecturer and you want to do X and Y. It's more about your specific task. But that does require lots of upfront work, but the output can be particularly good.
Yeah. Let me alert you, Ed, to the point. We do not have any paid versions, and we do not even have, ChatGPT 4.0, Omanai. Omanai, I have registered for it, but they say it's not available to our part of the world yet. And I think they say it's going to be free. And they are sort of rolling it out slowly to some parts of the world, but it hasn't automatically happened to my account. I'm waiting for it one fine day to wake up and see chat. Welcome to 4.0 Omanai version. But till then, we're all using, unpaid free versions.
Yes.
And that's our dilemma of equity, where I'm troubled by the digital divide, equity getting greater and greater in countries like yours and country like ours.
Yes.
We are not going to be able to afford a lot of fantastic AI materials of all sorts that are there, those tools. And I don't think we will be able to get access to those. But every day there are some coming up. They're pretty close to the paid version. I also see that. Like Poe is pretty much like not GPT-4, but it is like not even, it's better than 3. So it's closer to 4. And so you make do with, AI tools like that. If I see LUMS is not access, there's a lot of questions, Ed, about faculty worried about students using it, and they do not know how much is okay and how much is not okay, and what to do in that case. But I think you talked about a course policy when you started with the talk, that you have to devise your own course policy for that session. Unfortunately, at FCC, we are now to make the institutional guidelines. So those might become a basis for course policies to happen. But till that happens, all faculty is on their own. It's free for all sort of a thing. And what you say goes. But the problem, like Ed, you said it, so tell us if there's a way around, that you do not know how to catch AI. So being an assessment person, what would you suggest? Students will use AI. We do not have clear-cut guidelines.
Yeah.
And so how do you manage your teaching that they really learn and you really teach? So any suggestions?
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think that someone's alluded to this, and I was going to mention this when you said about access. I know of the website poe.com. That's being heavily used in other countries such as Hong Kong. And that's a way. And I think my hunch is that students will be using things like that to be able to access. They will find a way to access the paid for version, which means in some respects they are ahead of the game because the AI capacity is greater than what the educator might have. Yeah, and I think where I've seen the detection not work is because the burden of proof is often on us as educators to prove that students have used it. And if the tools that we're using to detect are less efficacious than we would need for ordinary burden of proof of any misconduct or criminal activity, if you like. Think about the examples of using essay mills or whatever to create work for you, contract cheating. That is problematic. But I think where I've seen it be most effectively used is saying to the students, we expect you to use it, but it's not a case of you using it to create the final output. You are using it in the formative stages to create your work, and you're using it as another tool that's similar to using, the resources that you might create, or the internet, or journal articles, or wherever it might be. And you're saying to them, well, what role did this play? How can you build that into your assessment to say, well, reflect upon that process. What did that teach you? How did you go back and forth? What was the dialogue? What was the interaction that you had with this source? And in a way, you're using the AI as a peer for it to, and I'm going to mention this a bit later on, where it's starting to give you more inputs. But of course, part of that is also discerning what bad inputs are, where, just as we discussed, where it doesn't give you the image that you want, or it doesn't give you the output that it wants. So in a way, the student's learning about asking for the correct information, and they're having to internally process information and internally process the prompt that they're going to subsequently give. I'll use the analogy that I've been thinking of in the last few weeks. It's a bit, using AI is a bit like being a parent of young kids, when you're trying to get them to do something and you're having to ask them in multiple different ways to get the same output that you want, the desired outcome, if you like. And it's a bit like that with AI. You ask them to do something, you don't get what you want. You have to ask in a different way and use that persuasion. And I think there's lots of back and forth. And going through this at the moment myself, I find that that's quite a constructive way of thinking about AI. Is you sometimes got to ask the question in a different way. And I think getting our students to think like that is really the way that they advance their knowledge. How do you ask things in different way? How can the AI give you the output that you want? And that is a skill. That is not something that every single student will have from day one, because that is an evolution of their expertise. And I think understanding that is that's the way that they interact with that is again, us being able to teach them that. And I do believe that is one of the ways that we can stay relevant as academics, is thinking about our role in knowledge construction through the use of AI, and not assuming, which I do worry, that the general public thinks that AI is going to solve every problem in the world and it can just do that from a couple of taps of the keyboard. It's more nuanced than that.
Yeah, it's definitely much more. I think you've said it very well. That, you use AI for, I mean, if I was a teacher, that's exactly what I would do. I would, if I were teaching yet, I have taught a long time, I would say, use AI, do the thing, and let's come back and discuss what is missing in this, what could be better, what are the things, it has not covered, and let them use it as a learning and a construction of their own mindset. What should the answer have been? But I think, Ed, you also talked in your session last year at a faculty retreat about making assessments different than the normative, traditional assessments we are doing. I mean, we talked about something like open book exams or stuff, or in-person events becoming more, assessments becoming more, desirable in an age of AI. What is your take on that?
Yeah, I think that we've increasingly seen more sort of what we're calling public displays of competence, where students, go away, do the preparation, but then they are having to defend what they do and come under scrutiny. And of course, when you have that scrutiny, if you have just merely typed something into AI to get an output, under scrutiny, the gaps in your knowledge and understanding will get exposed. But obviously, I'm very conscious that there's some comments in the chat around the workload implications and the effect that it has on us as academics, in terms of, by changing the way that we do assessment, that can necessitate a change in workload and a redistribution of effort. And how do we do that is obviously a balance, and that is problematic for some people.
Yeah. I think we have pretty much wrapped a session. There's still, many have left actually saying we need to be good users. Sorry, Alvina from FCCU, teaching and openly discuss about it with our students. We need to teach the ethical usage by using it ethically. Absolutely. Well said, Alvina. Let me see if the AI will be one of the future skills. Absolutely. It is a literacy. I think literacy skills, many countries or many universities want literacy skills as a part of the curriculum for students when they pass out. And I think that's right on dot, and we should be thinking about it. Mohammed Saleh, they are as important as soft skills. Well, AI skills do not take away as yet the need for the soft skills. The human skills, when they take over, because I have heard about it, I think Gemini 4.0 chat GPT is empathetic. and listens to your body language and your tone of voice and responds accordingly. Is that so, Pet? I haven't had practical experience with that.
Yeah, I mean, I can, and I think the other thing that it can do now is that, and if you follow Phil Dawson on Twitter, he's shown how a few samples of his own voice and a script, and AI is able to generate an entire keynote presentation with
Wow.
his voice and video, and he played that for a keynote, and no one spotted it. I mean, it's just amazing. The distance traveled in the last 15, 16 months
Yeah.
is, and people have already saying it's at the tip of the iceberg. So there are things that it can do. And I think that goes back to re-emphasizing the point that I made earlier about our role as higher education professionals in shaping and informing government policy on the use of AI. And I think, hopefully higher education is lobbying the Pakistani government for equitable access for countries like that, because I think you're right, you will widen the gap, which is not something that we want to reinforce. If history tells us anything, having an equity across the world is not helpful to the world's population. So we need to look at how we change that process. And hopefully OpenAI have a more benevolent outlook on the world than other companies,
apparently, it seems OpenAI is more open than the rest.
Well, that's kind of what we need, and maybe this will change the perceptions of that. Yeah.
There's a comment or a question from Lebanese American University, Nayeri. Have you tried using AI in correcting, evaluating students' work? When I tried AI, ChatGPT gave me 100 out of 100 on students' work. So I must have done something wrong. I don't understand. If you do, please respond, Ed.
Yeah, I think it needs. So I mentioned about the GPT. So I have used that for a GPT where I had specific assessment criteria for things that I was getting it to look for. I think one of the issues was that it was a lot of words. It was 2,500 words that I was asking it to assess. And I think what happens is the way that the algorithm works is that it sees certain words that align with the assessment criteria, almost gives it a tick to say, well, that's in there. It doesn't give the nuance and the understanding of how we would understand the argumentation. And I think it's not quite there yet in terms of that human judgment. And I think sometimes the worry is that the AI will be able to do this. But if you unpick the processes that we go through when we're marking work and the amount of different things that we're able to process simultaneously when we're marking work, you then realize the complexity that's involved in that AI would have to replicate. And that's where the human judgment is really hard for this at the moment to replicate. So, and also then you're extrapolating that across many different interpretations of that same question if it's a long form essay, for example. So I think that's really, and if any company you'll probably get this. If you ever post anything online about marking, you'll get a company saying, well, we can do this for you. There's lots of software out there, and they're not as good as they say because they don't have that nuanced understanding. So I think that there's a long way to go on that, but it can certainly give you an indication. It can act as a bit of a filter, but I wouldn't use it entirely at the moment.
I think you raised a very good point about saying that there is a certain bandwidth, I would say, to how much it can devour the AI. AI will look at a certain amount of text, and after some text, and Denny called it, I think, corruption of the thing or something. He used a very good word, and I had never known that before. And I had realized that in my 3-4 regeneration commands to the AI, the draft went from bad to worse rather than improving. And then I realized that ChatGPT was not able to even incorporate its own earlier information into the later text, and it became diluted and polluted, I think, in some ways to the information I wanted. So I think those are the tricks we have yet to learn about, and maybe now it is so, like you say, maybe tomorrow it is not so.
I think you're right. And I do remember a task where I was trying to give a small exemplar of for an external project of a good application for a question, a medium level application, and a really bad one. And I started it off with the excellent one, and it couldn't regress to make it medium, and even really couldn't get it to be terrible. It was almost hardwired to improve something, but not to make it worse. And and that was problematic, because I thought it would create these examples really quickly, and it couldn't do that. So that might have been my inputs, obviously, but I think that there are shortcomings on that. Yes.
Roman from American University of Central Asia, Bishkek. He says there's a quote from McKinsey report that, a certain amount by 2030, so many 375 million are going to switch jobs. Absolutely. And Roman, keep posted, because our last session is going to exactly talk about the future of the workforce and how AI is going to impact that. Absolutely. Then I see that somebody has raised a hand. Farida, if you could write it in the chat, it would be more appropriate. Many people are agreeing that yes, AI, Shashank Aga Khan Education from India, I think. Sood, I'm sorry if I mispronounce your name. Agree, as after AI, the AI operator will be required. Um, uh, will be required. AI not automatical. I am sorry. Am I not reading it correctly? It will be required. AI is not automatic. It is also a required command. And I am sorry that I have not been able to understand. Perhaps you're saying that it is not automated to the required commands as yet. So perhaps that's exactly. Mavish has said we need to prepare students of the future, absolutely, for the future jobs, and we cannot disassociate AI, absolutely, Mavish. Again, Roman has also talked that the question that I may ask my student is, if I as an employer can pay $50 a month to AI to do your job, why would I have a need to pay you? That's true. I use AI as my research assistant. You're so right. It's really helpful. Edward, you want to say something?
Well, I wanted to add that obviously the software that we're all engaging with AI, there are people behind that creating that software. It's not like there's a huge computer in a field that's doing this on its own, right? There are lots and lots and lots of people behind the scenes creating the information and reprogramming the things, so that there'll be a huge industry of people working for these companies to create this. It's not going to be a completely dehumanized process.
Absolutely. And also, nobody talks about it, but I was also shocked to read that it is a lot of debit on the climate with all the water it uses and the carbon monoxide it produces. And I read a very sad and depressing forecast somewhere that no amount of effort for climate change or climate equity or global climate can now reverse anything, given that AI is going to become more and more prevalent. And that really scared me. So we have got automotive, vehicles, which are now getting, perhaps it should be a compulsion by governments that AI should be also run in a way that is green, green AI or something. And perhaps we need to really, there are lots of other messages. I'm going to go through them very quickly. Using AI tools is good to some extent, but relying on it completely is a disadvantage, because it will affect your thinking and understanding capability. So far, if I may say, Fatma, and I wonder I think it is keeping you on your toes. Your mind is actually working more with AI in front of you. I find it challenges me.
Absolutely, I agree, and I wondered. I'm not sure if we've got enough time, but I have got a few slides that specifically look at assessment and feedback in terms of how AI by students might enhance the feedback process. I don't know if that would be useful to colleagues to hear some of that, and there are some early research studies that are showing some output from that. Would that be useful?
Yeah, we had scheduled you up till 2:30, and I think there are still 214 participants with us. And if they will leave, if they have to leave, but I think it's worthwhile doing what you have. It will be very powerful, Ed.
Okay, I'll share my slides again and go into that. So hopefully you can still see that. You can.
Yes.
Yes, great. So yes, I wanted to talk about how it might enhance feedback processes. So one of the things that's been sort of talked about is automated feedback, and I think when we look at automated, what we're saying is that students would put something into the system and it would provide immediate and automated feedback to students. And I think we've already discussed in the last couple of minutes with our interaction, Roxana, that a lot of this is dependent upon the information that goes in. So if our students, for example, are writing a 2,000-word essay and they're asked to argue the strengths and weaknesses of something, if they ask the AI to look at a draft piece of work on that, the success of the feedback that comes back to them will be very much dependent upon what they ask the AI to look for. And this is part of the issue, I think, with automated feedback, because I think from a workload perspective, it sounds really attractive for us as educators. And from a student satisfaction perspective, it sounds really positive for students to be able to get immediate feedback. However, when you scratch the surface on this, it can identify mistakes quickly, but these would be quite basic mistakes that the student has inputted incorrectly something, or spelling mistakes, or it may have not integrated particularly well with the question. And it might offer suggestions for improvement. However, the quality of that output is entirely predicated on the quality of the input. And I think that's where we have lots and lots of work to do around the automation of feedback. Now, there is software out there at the moment that is purporting to be able to provide automated feedback to students. But my interaction with this and my suspicion is that it is still very, very limited because of the depth of knowledge that would be needed in order to make those informed judgments. So many colleagues are worried that they will be replaced by automation, but similarly, many colleagues are worried that our students will begin to get false information or poor guidance. And I think where this works with assessment and feedback is, again, students' internal processing and making decisions and judgments about the quality of information that they're being given. So much like when students interact with their peers and ask peers to give them feedback on their work, they will make decisions about the quality of the feedback that their peers give them. So my argument on this around AI and feedback is that it is a skill about discerning the quality of the feedback that they're getting. So students that simply accept the output from a ChatGPT or others might find themselves not benefiting from that feedback modality because the quality is not there, as I mentioned, because the input's not there. So there's lots around that in terms of how we get our students to think about the potential. And I think one of the early articles here by Atali and Favien van der Klein from Holland attest to that. And I think when we move that on to personalized feedback, we also have the idea of learning analytics, where we have software that overlays student data. So most of us will have some sort of virtual learning environment that students will interact with our lecture material or our course material. They might contribute to class discussion boards. They might upload work, and work might get marked. AI can be fantastic for searching information across a student's experience based on the inputs and the different software systems that we utilize, and analyze a student's individual performance. Now, it can provide tailored feedback about their learning approach or their progress that, for us as academics, can provide us with really important data that might give us an indication of, say, a student's particular level of weakness across 7 or 8 different assessments. Or it might say that student particularly struggles with this type of assessment, or they contribute better in the month of March than they do in the month of October. So it can analyze student metrics really, really well, which might then allow us to create more relevant and actionable personalized feedback. But there's a strange quirk that happens with automated feedback, in that students feel like it's personalized to them. And quite often, personalized feedback in the systems that we use currently are quite sort of basic, but also input driven from us as academics. So we would say, if a student scores a 1 on this question, this is the feedback we want you to give them. If they score a 5 on this question, this is the feedback. And many of us have probably done that. Students perceive that as personalized feedback, even though it's not very personal to them. It is a quick functional feedback that gets sent to them. So when we talk about personalized feedback and AI, we are then migrating this to really nuanced feedback that aligns to the particular input that the student has put in, that would be different between that student and another student and another student and another student. And this particular article here by Holmes really emphasizes the fact that what this does, this feedback, is get students to self-reflect. And I think when we look at any data on assessment and feedback, particularly around the impact that feedback has on students, is that it's what students do with that feedback as a result. Now, personal self-reflection on feedback is something that students struggle with. They don't necessarily think, well, what did that make me do differently? Or how did I improve my work? Or what did I do as a result of that feedback? So self-reflection is something that we can hopefully then, if it comes earlier in the process, which personalized feedback through AI might happen because it doesn't have the same workload implications on us and turnaround times, that's something that could be really, really powerful. But again, it's about training our students to be able to engage with the AI software to generate that personalized feedback. So they have to do some of the work. It's not going to be a simple case of, here's my essay, what do you think about it? There's lots of training that's going to have to happen to get that. And one thing I would suggest that you do is try that yourself. Take a piece of work, maybe as an exemplar from your course, and pose that as work that you've generated with ChatGPT or the same, and say, well, what do you think about this? This is the criteria, and actually try it out for yourself, or use your own work that you've generated. Get that interaction. See if you can generate, for example, the feedback that you may have given your students on that piece of work, and see whether ChatGPT or Bard or Bing AI, whatever it might be, can generate the same feedback. Can it create the same nuanced interpretation of that work that you gave the feedback for? Can it replicate that? Because that would then start to give you an impression of the way that the students might interact with that. Because if we advocate this, we need to understand how a student might do that. And similarly, it can provide continuous monitoring. This is really important. We have lots of issues with students dropping out of university in the UK. How do we continually monitor and spot issues and struggling students and interventions? AI is fantastic at looking at large bodies of data and looking at trend analysis, for example. And that's where it can have a huge power, because for us to be able to crawl through that or spot that, it's very difficult if you've got large numbers. This can start to help us with that. And it can enhance engagement through interactive feedback. There's lots of different AI software tools that we can use in class through gamified elements, interactive quizzes. It can provide feedback quickly to students. It can be real time in terms of dashboards. You can integrate it into a VLE, for example, and that can have an effect upon the way that our students engage and stay on track. And similarly, in terms of feedback loops, it can actually also analyze large bodies of work. So for example, if you had, say, 100 pieces of work that students had done, you wrote 100 pieces of feedback, you could put all of that into ChatGPT, and you could say, I want you to analyze my feedback and give me trends, give me analysis of the student performance, where are the things that they're constantly struggling, so that you as an academic can say, well, actually, for that cohort, this was a problem. Now, that might inform subsequent interactions you have with that cohort if you teach them again, or similarly, it might inform the way that you teach the subsequent year on that same content, so that you understand the ways that your students are learning as a result of your instruction and the output that they're creating. based upon all of the other parameters. So I think that can have a real benefit to our own working lives in terms of analysing the data that we've generated. It's very, very effective for that. And the last thing I want to say is that there was a recent study here that compared the quality of human and ChatGPT feedback on students' writing. And what it found was that human feedback outperformed ChatGPT in terms of clarity, accuracy, and supportive tone. All of that relational stuff that we as humans are very, very good at. AI can struggle with that. It's not as nuanced. It's not as understanding of the dynamics between humans and humans. But it was very good, ChatGPT, at providing criteria-based feedback. And the reason for that is because the criteria was fed in, it was told what to look for, and it was very much, well, that's that, that's that, that's that. It's really good. Now, it's nearly comparable to human feedback, but you'll notice, point one, it's not as nuanced, it's not as relational. And I have a feeling from all of my interactions with students over the years as an assessment and feedback researcher, that students really value that relational dynamic, that interpersonal relationship that they have with the academics and their peers. And I think that despite what AI might purport to be able to do, it's going to be very, very difficult for it to remove that. And I think someone mentioned in the chat, we are, as humans, have interactions with other. That's something that we crave. And obviously we all found that out during the pandemic when we couldn't go out. That is something that we really want. And obviously the AI feedback quality varied with the overall quality of the essays. So it was able to distinguish and give different feedback based upon different achievement statuses, but go back to point one, still not as good as the human interaction that many of us have come to expect. And the last thing I want to say is about prompt engineering for feedback. And I think this is one of the skills that we can teach our students about the different quality of the prompts that we get them to input in terms of how that might create the feedback. Now, one of the reasons why I think this might be advantageous for students is because it will get them to start to interrogate the quality of their own outputs. It will start the process of them questioning how good their work is, and also thinking about the distance that they might need to travel in order to get the highest quality of work. Because any time that you start to think about and articulate why something is good or why something is bad or how it can be improved, then you start to really generate the feedback that can make a difference. You can also get it to a point where students are comparing the feedback that AI gives, but also the feedback that an expert gives, such as yourselves, or peers, and start to synthesize the different feedback that they would get and whether there are consistent messages or detractions from the norm. Now, what it can say is, in terms of efficiency gain, is that ChatGPT can produce 49 pieces of feedback in the same amount of time that an expert can produce one piece of feedback. Now, that's fine. I totally get that. And I think from an efficiency point of view, that highlights that, yes, it can do something very, very quickly. However, the whole point of feedback is not about how much feedback is generated. It's about what it does to the learner or the work as a result of that feedback coming out. So I think that one piece of feedback that the human maybe have generated could potentially have more impact than the 49 pieces. It's more about the effect that it has on the learner. So I would always caution anyone saying, well, there's loads and loads of feedback from ChatGPT, but only a little bit from the human, because it's about the impact that that feedback has on future learning and future work more than the volume. And I mentioned earlier, and there's, I think, a good indication there that we do need continuous research about prompt engineering and strategies for optimal AI performance in educational settings. And I'm going to be starting a project with our student success team next year at my university, looking at students of different achievement statuses and how they interact with AI and looking at their particular prompts. So we're going to ask them to submit the prompts that they put into the AI and the work that they submitted and the subsequent iterations to look at whether or not the quality of their put prompts, the quality of the use of the feedback from AI and the final quality of the work, whether that is differentiated by their achievement status, i.e. are they a higher achieving student or a lower achieving student. So really looking at the way that the quality of the learner at the start and whether their interaction with AI, again, looking at this from an inclusivity and equity point of view about whether AI widens attainment gaps, for example, between different types of students that we have at my own institution. And I think that's really interesting to study, to look at how AI affects different learning behaviours and different types of learners in terms of the outputs and the potential achievement status that they have. So, thank you for listening. Are there any questions from the audience about that particular area, that feedback?
Before, there are some nice comments which will I go on to, but there's a couple of things that you said in your previous slides. One was about the large body of material that you could put in the large language modeled AI. And unfortunately, those are, again, I think, largely paid for versions. So far, the unpaid versions do not have that much capacity, if I am not wrong. I do not know of any that would have a very large capacity for lots of data. And so what you are saying is that it's excellent for data analysis, data analytics, and so on. So it will have a great effect on that AI. But you also talked about the human element, that it's the human element that makes us different right now, I think. And I am again saying that it is current because I have seen models of human-like robots behaving very much human-like. And as time goes on, they will become more and more human. I came across an AI program, Character AI or something, and it's already saying that you can produce a character that you want for whatever you want, and it will talk to you and it will respond to your specific concerns in that role and so on. And it was quite scary, actually. And for me, to look at that, I didn't even want to try it. That if something will become so human-like that it will guide me, counsel me, comfort me, and so many other things as well. So those are things, I think, that are yet to come on the horizon, though a lot of good can be done. But
I think you're absolutely right, and I think the potential is quite scary. It almost feels endless. But I think that goes back to the earlier point around what do we want AI to do and feature in society, and I think that does go back to government policy. It goes back to the way that we want society to be shaped by AI, and I think that is incumbent on higher education professionals, learned people to have an impact on. And if you talk to any sociologists, or they have huge concerns that will, and psychologists equally the same, that will have concerns on the way that human life evolves. Because you're essentially creating a false narrative, aren't you? At the moment we can see the difference, but you could imagine a time where that is the norm, and therefore that isn't a point of difference.
There's a very good question, but I think it's about tools. American University of Ifrane, Morocco, I think, Violetta. Do you have any suggestions about the use of AI for faculty in computer sciences? I think that's what she has, computer science, and specifically introduction to programming. AI can solve simple computing problems, and students are always looking for examples, but it seems like does not really help develop the logical thinking that underlies good coding. Now, that question is way beyond my level. So I haven't come across any idea, if anybody in the audience or you had, about computer science, programming, and so on.
No, but I know that from some of our computer science colleagues that they were particularly worried that if they set a basic programming task, then the AI would be able to, and indeed the engineering team, that the AI would be able to generate the output that would be passable very quickly. And that was a concern. So they've had to think about their assessment slightly differently to not afford students the opportunity to do that so easily.
Okay. There are lots of people who are very thankful for the session, thanking you for a great session. But Ali Raza from University of UMT, forget, but anyway, university, and from Pakistani university is talking about, where did it go? Sorry. I'm sorry, it seems I've lost it. I will just go to Shashank Sood from Aga Khan in India. AI feedback will be easy to create in numbers compared than human, but I think we need to see the accuracy. Absolutely right. Very informative session from Mombasa. Thanks for sharing. Yeah, Habib University, somebody talk by David Mellan, who runs the vastly popular online course CS50. So that should be a computer science course from Harvard on how they are using AI to provide one-on-one mentorship and feedback to students. So there is a thank you so much, Bakar Salim from Habib University. So that question about computer science perhaps might find an answer over here. Thank you for a nice. AI has the capacity, but only if used against predefined rubrics. That's Mavish from RCLT. Yes, I think that's right. That's what I experienced. Is that so, Ed?
Yeah, and I think I had a colleague who used to work for Apple in their AI division, and he's now coming to lecture with us. And he built his own GPT and within 3 hours, trained that GPT to understand the rubric that I use to mark my work for a module that I taught. And he had the feedback, and he had the work and the criteria, and he was able to replicate my feedback through the AI. So the AI, 100% decisions. I think it was on 24 essays about pass, fail, and distinction. It was able to discern from the criteria, the rubric, all of those correctly. Now, the generation of the feedback wasn't as nuanced as mine because it didn't have the perspective, but it was able, against set criteria, very effective at assessing of that work. So
yeah, Mafish has raised lots. She's another person who is good in assessments, and I think that's her forte as well. And she has raised lots of comments. I wonder if AI can give intricate feedback on elaborated responses, or would it remain very basic like MCQs? Any idea about that, Ed?
Yeah, I do think it's very effective at looking at the criteria that you tell it to look for, but that nuanced human interpretation, or even being able to reference previous things that students have done or draft work, it's not got, because the chain of information is not there. It can only work off the input and the information that it's got. So I do think that rubric-based assessment, yes, it can do that very effectively. But if it's not told things, it won't know to look for them. And I think that's where the human stuff and the interactions that we've had with students and all of those sorts of things that we don't necessarily always understand that's happened, that it can't do at the moment.
Lebanese American University, Nayeri, has another question. For example, if we ask students to write an essay and they use ChatGPT AI for that, how can we evaluate their essay? What would you suggest? The other two.
I mean, yeah, and I do think that probably happens. But again, the quality of whatever they produce is a lot to do with what the input is that they put in. So if it's just they put the essay title and say, write me an essay on, there will be lots of issues with that output, because it can sometimes be very sort of, we have a phrase we call quite vanilla, quite bland. And the output might lack referencing, for example, or correct referencing, because it has a habit of making stuff up in terms of academic references. I've found if you do that, you will get a basic output, but then going back and forth with it and change it. But of course, there is a now moving agenda where students will take that and then they will go off to another site to sort of de-AI the work. So they'll humanize it, if you like. And I think like people use Quillbot or other things like that to take away the AI element and actually make it more like a human has written it. So there are software pieces out there that people are using, some paid for, some free, that purport to be able to do that. There's someone has put in, Fatima, says Turnitin detects AI generated material. The efficacy of that is not one that the field would accept right now. And if you want to know about that, Phil Dawson, as I mentioned earlier, has written about that, around how efficacious Turnitin's AI software is. Most universities in the UK have switched that off in terms of their detection, because they don't necessarily trust the data on which that claim is made. Sorry for Turnitin there. Work to do.
There are lots of many other interesting comments as I'm going back into the chat history. I think KCWU, Kuratul and Khalil, she was talking about literacy, student literacy, and she says that three things are important for teaching students: how to write effective prompts, how to paraphrase the context for effective personal learning, and bypassing AI. How do you how do you paraphrase to bypass AI detection? That's interesting. And using AI ethically and not rely on AI for everything. And so far, students have had a positive approach to AI in my classes. I think in all these discussions, the undercurrent is the need for a very strong institutional and a class policy. And I think a class policy that is cognizant of the institutional guidelines, so that everybody and students are on the same page, rather than having to deal with different things and different rules and norms in different classrooms. And I wonder if in the end, we will share with you a template so that you can draft your policy. And we apologize. We as Jeter FC have not done an institutional policy, and we at CLT are working with it with a group of faculty and students. And so things will become a bit easier after that. But I do see that there are a lot of other questions and comments. So thanks for an enlightening session. Turn sometimes fails to detect. Yes, is an easy way to feed this assignment back into and ask if this is an AI generated material. Does that work? If you put up an essay written and ask ChatGPT or AI if the work was AI used or what?
Yeah, I'm not sure if that would work all of the time. I've not tried that myself, because we don't look for detecting whether stuff's AI. I don't know whether this person has tried that, if it's 100% efficacious.
Yeah, somebody said, if we have Google, why do we need AI for information? But then I think Mavish responded that Google has its limitations. Informative session. I don't know, American University of Refrain, again, Violetta. One problem with AI-generated material detection is that many people use these AI-based tools to write better. So it's not surprising that the material is not a material that is not, I'm sorry, AI generated is detected as being generated. The advice provided by AI-based tools for writing creates a very standard kind of writing. And I think you said that already, Ed, in your talk, that it's more like very criteria-based structure, because that's how the algorithms are fed into the data and how it works. I think that's what gives it away more than anything. It's not like a paragraphing, unless you tell it to put it into a paragraph. It gives you a very structured sort of a response. Is there something else that I have left, Mavish?
I think you've pretty much covered everything.
Covered everything. And there are lots of thanks. And we still have 186 with us. And there's a lot from international audience that is with us. And we are very thankful to all of you. We are just to say that you're asking for lots of information about free AI tools and some other things. We at CLT have developed all these briefs, and at the end of, I think we have been sharing these in different sessions as further resources, as we are doing with Ed session. So please, if you do not have anything that you would like, please refer back to those sessions, or we will try to send these documents as a collection. Go to our website. Gohar, will you put up our website? And there we have a CLT, the CLT website, we have AI briefs on tools, on ethical and responsible use, on prompt and prompting frameworks, even a comparison of different frameworks. And we have some other which are very helpful. And the tools are all free, and they are sort of divided by sets of tasks. For what task and what tool. So if you could, Gohar, show the site, but the AI tool, in the general resources, you'll find the AI tool list. Please go there and you will have that. Can we have the last slide of resources so we can walk them through some of the resources that are applicable to this session? Please, the last slide. And so we can, a lot of those links that you want are right here with us, and we'll send these to you. And if you can see, for all of you, we would like to, there's the course policy statement that we have developed for FCCU, and we encourage our faculty to use this. And though this will be very individualistic for now, we hope that with the AI institutional policy, this will become more, more structured. We have also an AI guidebook. It's an infographic. It walks you through what are some of the main tasks with all the links, the tools, everything. Gohar, could you show this infographic? And then there are these 60 ideas for assignments and so on. If you go through this infographic that we have very painstakingly developed, all these underlined segments are actually links where you can go. This is about what is cheating and what is not. A lot of you were asking. It does not exactly tell you where to draw a line, but it gives you 10 scales where you establish your threshold for your class or as an institution. AI literacy has documents and a lot of all those introduction to AI. So all those underlines what is a roadmap for a semester? What do you do before a semester? What do you do during the semester? What do you do at the start and after the semester? So if you go through this and the links, you have pretty much everything that you need at your fingertips. And then it's up to you. Use, reflect, improvise, improve. That's what I would suggest. Yes, and yes, Habib, Noor, you have Bakar Salim, this is not the CLT online resources. Please put up the online resources site. So I am very thankful for the comments that are coming in. And there's a hats off, great session. Thanks and regards. That really gives us Taylor's University Malaysia. Give us the website, please. Can we have the website on our on this as well? And so we will give you these resources. Please, put this website on the chat so that everybody has these resources. You'll actually see a lot more over here. Oh, thank you so much, Ed. Atikur Rahman from University of UAF. I'm sorry, I do not know. Can you please write your question? We are over our time. So we would like to, Gohar wants us to talk about also. That was a sharp one. Gohar, you're advertising for us. We are doing a research methodology course, again, with lots of international experts. AI integration into the research methodology course, and we will be sending it out to most of you in international partners as well. So thank you so much. Ed, you cannot imagine what a perfect session it was. And I think it really brought us together on a lot of things that we need to do as educators and how to use AI with caution for now. And be careful, and thank you so much. Greatly honored to have you. Thank you, Ed.
Pleasure. Thank you for the invite.
Bye-bye.